Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform, multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, I talked with M. Scott Ford of the Legacy Code Rocks podcast about managing your applications and legacy code. We talked about why metrics, analytics, and logging are so important. We talked about what legacy code is, and Scott also talked about why tests are so important to him. Along the way, Scott shared some amazing tips for developers regardless of where they are in their journey and regardless of the technology stack that they use, including how he uses Pact.io, that's Pact.io, to make integration testing a breeze. He also shares some of the ways that he stays up to date with all of the libraries and packages that are out there. Pro tip, it's related to our chat about metrics, but I won't spoil anything for you just yet. So make sure you stick around to the end of the episode to find out about those. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, Scott, is thank you ever so much for joining me on the show. I know you're an incredibly busy person. We're all really busy these days.
Everybody's busy. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Right? Hey, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I thought before we start talking about managing dependencies and legacy code and things like that, I thought maybe we could have a quick chat about you and the content that you put out there. That way, if there's someone listening to this who hasn't had a chance to check out your stuff, they go, oh, cool, I'll click this thing because Scott sounds awesome.
So I guess some of the ways to kind of catch up with me is to head over to quirkybytes.com. There you can find the company that I run with my business partner. And then there's an online community that we started called Legacy Code Rocks. It's at legacycode.rocks. We've got a podcast, a Slack community, a Slack-based community, and a weekly virtual meetup that you can attend. There's information for how to do that over in Slack. And so those are things we've got going on for folks who are interested in all things legacy code or think they might be.
Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely go check those out. I mean, before we even start with any of that, what is legacy code, right? Because I have perhaps a different view to everybody else. Everybody's got their own view, right? So what is Scott's definition of legacy code?
I think of it as anything that's hard to change, and the reason it could be hard could be that it's hard to, like, you can't understand it, or it could be that you don't have the tools, or you don't have the knowledge yet, right? So, but there's some impediment to making a change. It's not easy to change. That's, to me, that's what makes something kind of legacy. So there's the more traditional things we think of, the aging system in the corner that hasn't been touched in years. That certainly fits that definition. Those things are hard to change. But it can also be something that's only a year old, and it could have gotten in a state where it's difficult to change because of choices that were made, and could be perfectly reasonable choices that were made, but the result of those choices has made it tough to make changes.
Okay. So is that different to just straight up tech debt then, in your opinion?
I think it is, because the reason it can be hard can be that there's not documentation, or that the person who worked on it isn't around anymore, or it could be there's lots of reasons. Like, for me, when I think of tech debt, it's something that was taken on intentionally, or perhaps not intentionally, but maybe accidentally through choices that were made. And it's more of a technical challenge, right? Like, they're in the name. but I think you can also have more kind of personal, people issues that make it difficult. Like it's, the reason it's hard to change now is because the knowledge is lost, right? And so that's not really, it will be a technical challenge to like kind of recreate or recover that knowledge, right? In some form. But that's not really debt that the team took on. Like, the team doesn't really make a choice to have somebody decide that they're going to quit, right? Like that's not really, I don't think of that as a debt, that the team has taken on.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, because sometimes there is a technical decision. You have to say, look, we'll do it this way and we'll just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And we possibly can change it in the future, but to change it would be more difficult, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the technical debt involves choices about the solution, and they can be choices we realize we're making, which I think is the like obvious technical debt. But then there's like the unobvious technical debt, and those are the choices we don't realize we're making. But I think it all comes down to it. It's the result of a choice that was made.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Legacy Code Rocks podcast.
Okay.
Right? Because I'm a big fan, and I know that there's some people. Hi, you're very welcome. I know there's some people in the Tabs and Spaces community who are big fans too. And let's talk about that for a moment. So is that just you and your co-hosts just sitting around going, Legacy Code's the best, Greenfield sucks? Is that what you're doing?
No. It's so our mission is more to try to change the attitude towards Legacy Code, to make it not a pejorative. So to make it something that people don't look at as a bad thing, right? It's not, it can be something that brings you joy. It can really trying to change the attitude that is given to a lot of projects that are in this state. And and there's tons of attitudes I've encountered over the years, but almost all of them negative, before us really kind of taking on the journey of trying to counter that. But nobody wants to, I've heard things like nobody wants to work on a legacy code project, or like, oh, it's just a legacy mess. It's, it's a nightmare. And, or, people not wanting to touch it because they're afraid that they'll, ruin their resumes or things like that. Like, there's, lots of negative reasons and negativity, or like the people who built it didn't know what they were doing, or like why would you even put up with that? And so instead, kind of making it about like, what's possible with these systems, and really trying to counter the narrative that everything new is amazing, right? Like new equals amazing, new equals better, new equals best. That's not always true. Like, I think there's a lot you can learn from older systems. There's a lot you can learn from systems that are difficult to work with. And I think, just encountering one of those systems and then deciding like, oh, it's a mess, let's start over. Like that's a waste. So I see that as a waste. I think, my bias is almost always towards figuring out a way to harvest and resuscitate and restore a system that is in this state where it's difficult to work with. And, especially if it's still providing value, it's still valuable. It's still doing something for somebody. So to think that it could be thrown away and built from scratch, and done without error, or done quickly, or I feel like that's almost always wrong. There's almost always things that get missed.
Sure. I can see that. And I think it's something that I feel doesn't happen so much in other engineering disciplines. I mean, I may be wrong, right? My only experience of engineering is software engineering, right?
Right.
Like the metaphor I was going to use was like, There's this bridge. It was built in the 50s. It works fine, but it's legacy. Let's tear it down and build a new one. Well, like, why? It works, don't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I don't have that background either. So, if there are civil engineers listening, maybe they can educate us. But I think, I can imagine that with most engineering disciplines, there are ways to solve problems that come in and out of favor. There are ways to, ways to use materials in different ways. There's new knowledge about environments. There are changes in the way that structures get stressed. I can imagine that I think obviously a bridge that was built with horses in mind might not stand up to automobiles, right? Like that just seems reasonable to me. And I think, we see similar challenges with the software systems that we work on, and in that if it was originally created with one particular use in mind, then, in its current form, it may no longer, no longer be of service. I think for me, when we think about bridges and kind of comparing that to software systems, the goal may be to have a new bridge. For me, what should never happen is a complete halt in traffic. So I think, tearing down the old bridge and then building the new one, I think is something that should be avoided. Instead, I think, work on building a lane, another lane of the bridge that can accommodate, the new use case that's been discovered, or that can be built with a more updated approach or different materials. And then when you've got enough lanes to support all the traffic, then you can tear down, what was essentially the old bridge, but you never had a disruption in traffic. People were able to use it. So for me, like that incremental approach to modernization is really key and really important. And recognizing that we can make improvements where we end up with something that's new, but we don't have to like destroy utility in order to achieve it. We don't have to create a service disruption.
Sure. You could, to bring it back to development, you can create something that extends rather than replaces, right? Like you say, you extend by adding a new lane. Yeah.
Or even with the bridge, like I don't know if I can imagine this might be possible, but you could, you could build a shell around the bridge, around the existing structure, and or replace the support structures one by one with different material. And so you've got modern support structures supporting older pieces, and then you can swap out the other older pieces one at a time. The ship of Theseus is another metaphor that I think of a lot in these scenarios, and it's that's for people who might not be aware, is this idea that if Theseus and the folks on his boat, if they repaired the boat as they were on their journey and they replaced every board as it aged out, and at the end of their journey, if every single board had been replaced, was it the same boat? It was kind of the thought experiment, right? And to me, like that's what keeping something up to date looks like, is replacing those bits and pieces at a time, and instead not saying like, oh, we're going to put into this port and we're going to build a completely new boat and nobody can travel until the new boat's built. Like that's, so to me, I like those more kind of incremental approaches to making things better. Anytime there's a suggestion that like, where people say that you can't make improvements and do other things at the same time, I kind of reject that. I'm like, I really push on that. And it's like, well, why not? Is that a technical reason, or is it just you think it's going to be harder, or you're worried about how much it might cost. Like, what is the motivation for saying that it can't be done?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And it's a conversation. It feels like it's a conversation that sometimes those in charge, or maybe those who are in charge of the team of developers, are like, no, replace it. It's getting too hard to deal with. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just they're misunderstanding, or maybe us as developers aren't communicating it correctly, or it's a difficult one, right?
My experience has been over the years, it's the developers advocating that the tear down and start over happens. And it's usually the people who've paid, it's usually the people who are in charge of the budget who are pushing against that and saying, work with what you've got. And so this tension gets, this tension gets created because the developers get it in their head that all of their current challenges could be solved by starting over from scratch. And the people who are in charge of the budget are very resistant of going down that path. And so you have this animosity that broods where, or brews, I guess, animosity that brews, where the folks who are in charge of the budget start to get really frustrated with the developers always complaining, and the developers feel like they're not given the freedom to make the choices that they feel are best. And I think that's where that can come in, and I think that's where a lot of the negativity about older code bases can come from, is this assumption that it will be better if we could do it from scratch. Whatever dimension better is usually being imagined in my experience, it's usually only one or two dimensions, right? Like they're imagining that an aspect of the system will be better, but they're overlooking lots of other parts. So I have like a slide in a conference talk that I've given in the past where, I imagine somebody complaining about their kitchen, and so they bulldoze their house. And they're like, oh, but all those other rooms are actually okay. Like, I was just upset about the kitchen. But now we've bulldozed the house. So it's, I think there are times where we can get so focused on like one aspect of the system that we're frustrated with, that we completely discount the value of the other parts. And so
I love that analogy.
Replacing certainly replace a kitchen, get a new kitchen, but you don't need to, you often don't need to bulldoze the entire house to get a new kitchen.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I'm all for a good metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Always. I love a good metaphor because it's truthy, right? It gets the point across.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that one because it is almost exactly what we're doing when we're advocating for starting again. And it's like, especially if you inherit a code base from another team or another entity, right? I often sit and think, well, how big-headed do you think you are? Or rather, how big-headed are you that without even looking at the code or the requirements, you just know that it'll be better if you do it? Because that's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah. So there's this poem by Rudyard Kipling, I probably just butchered their name, called The Palace. And it talks about this, this king mason who, comes across this spot where they want a palace to exist. And because they are a king and a mason, they both have the resources and the know-how to build a palace. But when they get there, they discover all of these pieces of stone that, have this warning scrawled on them. And the warning is, after me cometh a builder, tell him I too have known. And the king mason is convinced that this will be the perfect spot for a palace. And so he dives in and starts building a palace there, and gets this point where realize it's not going to be possible. And all those discarded bits of stone with the warning on it, maybe that person knew what they were talking about. And so the poem ends with that king mason, tearing down the attempt that's in progress, and then scrawling on each one of the stones, the same morning, after me cometh a builder, tell him I too have known. And so I think it's a great kind of, it captures that, that refusal to acknowledge that the people who tried before me could have possibly known what they were talking about. And in that moment when you have to kind of come to grips and acknowledge and realize like, okay, so this was a bad idea. And in the poem, the person gives up and moves on. But I feel like I've worked on many teams where just steam ahead anyway.
I love that, and I feel like it's part of a thing where perhaps more developers should read outside of their own sort of speciality or experience outside of their speciality. Perhaps for people who don't read, they maybe listen, right? Because like over the past 2 years, I've been consuming loads of content that got nothing to do with development. In the same way that there is no way that Rudyard Kipling, a man who was in the First World War, could have known about computer software engineering, right?
Right.
There's no way he could have known about it. But he's taking that same idea of the same principles we use as engineers, I suppose, and put it into an art form, right? And I've been doing this thing recently where I read loads of different books that are maybe business books, maybe life advice books or whatever. And there's always something in there that applies directly to our practice as developers. Like the one I keep throwing out there because it's quite apt to, I feel like, everybody, is the KonMari method, which is the life-changing joy of tidying up.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here in a room that's completely just trashed, full of stuff all over the place, right?
Same.
But the core tenet, if you boil her advice from that 300-page book down to one sentence. And it's been said before, but if it doesn't spark joy, throw it out or get rid of it, right? And if you replace spark joy with if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, get rid of it. Well, that's clean code right there, right?
Right. Well, and I think it also touches on something that for me comes up over and over again with almost every organization that we work with, and any code base that I've ever taken a peek at. I try to ask the question, do you know how much of this is actually used by your customers? And I, a lot of organizations don't have that knowledge. And there are ways to find, dead code, code that just, is provably never executed. And if you have tooling like that in your ecosystem, use it and delete that code, right? Because it's not serving you. Like, get rid of it. I think also, instrument your systems so that you can know what features are being used. So that feature that you built to solve a problem that, everyone in leadership was really excited about, there was a big push to get it out the door, there was a big launch, a lot of fanfare. How many of your customers are using it? How often does it get used? And does the level of engagement that your customer base has, is it worth keeping it around? And I think that's very much a business decision. That's not a decision that just random software developers should be making. It is a piece of data that leadership should know, and leadership should be able to make an informed decision about and say, this piece of functionality costs us so much energy to keep working. And even if you just come up with a guess, right? It's what percentage of the software supports that feature, right? Like you could engineering team could probably come up with a good guess for that, and then you could make that the percentage of the budget that supports that team, and then look at how much engagement your customers are giving in that, and how many new customers ever touch that feature, and is it worth keeping? And if it's not, get rid of it. And I feel like there are too few organizations that delete things when they're no longer serving them. So even if it's a software system that isn't public facing, let's say it's only internal, it's internal to the business. It maybe automates the business operations, and it's, maybe models lines of business that the organization performs. When the organization decides to stop a line of business, delete the code that supports it. And I think, try really hard to keep those things in sync, because they're just, we don't delete enough. Like, I feel like there's so much effort and so much focus on adding new features. And I feel like we don't have enough conversations around deleting things.
Perhaps we should start doing a new type of development, deletion-driven development.
Deletion-driven development.
Delete all the features until someone starts yelling at you, and then put them all back.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you certainly need to be smart about it, right? Like, and make sure you're not going to wreck somebody's day or make it hard for them to get their job done. And at the same time, if one of the things that can slow engineering teams down, one of the things that can make it difficult to work on a software system could be the CI/CD process, and it could be that 10% of the build time is spent validating a feature that 1% of the customer base actually uses. So that's real time that you can compute. Is it worth having your dev team wait to make sure that's still working? Maybe it is. Maybe that 1% of your customer base is really important, right? But I think that investigation, at the very least, needs to happen, and I think for most organizations, it's not happening.
Totally, yeah, and I think that it goes into like just plain business sense, like. It's budget. I mean, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, right? But it's just budgeting, right? It's like, it costs this much to do this thing. Are we getting a return on that investment? Mm-hmm. Yes or no? And it has to come down to that. And the only way that you can do that, I suppose, is to have metrics and logging and, whatever form that metrics and logging takes. Mm-hmm. You have to have that, and you have to be able to surface that in a way that makes sense to the people that need to see it, right?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if you're perhaps surfacing this metrics and logging to the CEO of the company or the CFO of the company, somebody who makes the financial decisions, and you're showing them, well, we've got this entity framework exception right here, right, and this HTTP response exception, right? They don't care. What they care about is how much money am I getting back for how much money I'm putting in. And can we show that on a bar graph or a pie chart or something, right? Mm-hmm. And as long as the numbers are heading in the correct directions for them, they'll be happy. But then when it comes to that time when they're like, well, actually, like you said, right, we've spent $1 million building this new feature, and we've only seen $100,000 back, and market research suggests we're never going to see any more than that. Is it worth cutting our losses and getting rid of it? Because, like you say, there's going to be some support deal in place where we have to, maybe it takes 25% of the engineering team to actually keep it up and running. Well, if it's never going to make you any more money, and I have to put this caveat at the end, and if you're in the business of making money,
right,
then, because obviously different businesses are aiming for different things.
Absolutely.
If you're aiming for making money and you're not making money, that's your decision right there, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, that's so like being able to answer that question, how, what percentage of my customers are engaging with this feature? What percentage of my customers are using this feature? I think that having an answer to that question is a cross-cutting concern that, people should really consider figuring out a way to design into their systems. I think like a way to do it could be, detailed tracing or detailed analytics. But there's probably a whole host of ways to kind of get the answer to that question. But, kind of figure out for the problem that you're solving, what's a good way to know and do so in a. I will say this as a caveat, like it's important to make sure that the ultimate customer's privacy is respected as part of that data collection.
Yep.
So you don't want to you don't want the need for that information to cause other challenges, but I do think it is really useful to know in an anonymous aggregated way how often something's being engaged with.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. I think you raised a very, very important point there about the anonymity of the user. Mm-hmm. Not just from a person-to-person point of view, right? Like if I'm using some system, I don't want the metrics and the logs that help the bean counters. I hate that phrase, but the person who makes that financial decision, right? They don't need to know it's Jamie who's clicking this button. They need to know that it is a person, right?
Right.
Or it might be an automated service. They need to know that something is using that service. They don't care who, right? And so from a personal point of view, yes, I don't want my information being spread to whoever just because, we can, right? Mm-hmm. But also there's a regulatory consideration, because I know that there are some states in the US that allow you to collect data and some states that don't.
Yep.
Over here in the UK and over in Europe, we don't allow it. It has to, like the regulations for GDPR state that it has to be like required for the running of the business, right? There has to be a real business case for you to collect that data.
Right. And if you do collect it, then they're, to maintain a person's right to be forgotten, they need to be able to see what data you've collected, and you need to give them the ability to delete it if they ask for it to be deleted. Yeah. Those are all very important to comply with, as you're collecting this. And even if you're collecting data analytics anonymously, if you're doing so in a way that you can still recognize individuals and individual behavior, depending on why your system gets used. So let's say, let's think of a healthcare scenario. The usage patterns of an individual, if you're able to see, if you're able to drill down and see that, that individual uses feature A and they use feature B, right? If you're able to see that, then that might reveal something about that individual that they might want to keep private, right? So, so I think keep that in mind as well. So, and I think that's just part of the ethics of collecting this information and making sure that it's done with respect to the human beings that are interacting with the systems that we build.
Sure. In an ASP.NET Core context, I tend to just use perhaps the automatically generated request ID and maybe a correlation ID if I'm talking across microservices. Hey, here's just pass this on for your logging, right? So you can tell where this request came from, right?
Yeah.
And that's typically all I've ever needed, but I've never worked on, I have worked on some big systems, but I haven't worked on big systems where the metrics and the logging were desperately required. I just throw the logging in there because it's nice to have.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of web applications, just knowing the URLs that are hit is going to teach you a lot. Like even if you just know that, so you don't even know you don't even know the IP addresses or anything like that. You just know, this URL was accessed, X number of times within a 24-hour period or 1 month period or something like that. For most web applications, those URL endpoints, will be a close approximation to feature, and will tell you a lot. And if you have URL endpoints in your system that don't get hit in, say a 3-month time period, maybe those are just never used. Maybe they're only used at year end, right? That's something you have to keep in mind. But it could be that they're just never used.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense too. I joined a team at the time of recording. I joined a team about a year ago who had a web API that had 250 different endpoints, and I was like, okay, which is the priority for support? Mm-hmm. And the answer was all of them. And I was like, well, that's none of them then.
That's none of them. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because I can't physically support 250 things, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how do we know which ones are important? Well, they're all important. Right. Okay. So when this was being architected, did you have a discussion with the end customer, the end client, about like which ones were built first? Well, these ones. Okay. So does that mean that they are the most important ones? No, they're just the ones that we built first. Right. Okay. So, how are you going to support that system if you don't know what's important, right? Naturally, yes, everything's important, but like you say, if you know which endpoints are being hit the most, you could then make that decision of, well, this one's being hit 1,000 times a minute, and this one's being hit once every 2 years. Mm-hmm. I think it's safe to say that the 1,000 times a minute is a little bit more higher priority, right? Because when that one drops, that's 1,000 requests a minute that are going to fail.
Yeah. And if you can improve performance on that one, then you've improved. You've likely done two things. If you can improve performance, you will have reduced the compute resources that are necessary. So there's going to be a cost savings, and you will have saved some time of the people who are using the system,
and perhaps loads of money too. Because if you can improve it, and everybody understands it, and you've bolstered on some more tests, and you've got loads of stuff around it, more logging, more metrics, more alerts, perhaps, then that's even better, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you then, like I said, and like you've said several times, you're then able to make the intelligent, informed decision about which things do we need to focus on, right? Because without those metrics and those logging things, and without the analytics, and without all of these things that we know that we all should do, but very few of us actually do, like test-driven development and things like that, or even just writing tests. There's a few people that I know directly who will chuckle exactly at that point, because they know some of the troubles I've had in the last 6 months. Like, all of these things are not just there as busy work to slow us down. It's like those things should be best practices, right?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to tests, I look at them for myself as I write them to convince myself that what I wrote is what I meant to write. And I think they also provide durable value to make sure that in the future it still works the way I meant it to. So, I come at it from a kind of I start from a place of personal accountability. So even if I'm on a team where nobody else engages in that behavior, I still will, because that's the process that I follow to convince myself that that what I've built is what I meant to build. And if others have another mechanism for convincing themselves that what they built is what they meant to build, then okay. And then, whether or not they find value in tests, automated tests as a kind of a durable artifact of what we meant, and whether or not something's working correctly. I think that's a reasonable debate that people can have as well. But I hope, and if me writing tests gets me kicked off the team, then it gets me kicked off the team. But I'm going to write them.
Yeah, right. You may get kicked off the team, but then the code that you've written has a bunch of other stuff that can be run to prove that the code
Yeah.
you wrote does what it needs to do.
Yep.
So even by kicking you off the team, they've made the software better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. So then, you see, that's my thing, right? The only way that you can manage the code that exists, whether it's legacy code, tech debt, or things that you're writing right now, the only way that you can effectively manage it, either as a person or as a team, is to know what's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to know how it's being used, to know how often it's being used, and then you can make that decision. When somebody reports, like, oh, this is a P1 bug with this piece of functionality, you can then turn around and go, it's a P1 bug, but it's only ever been used by 3 people since we released it 4 years ago. Is it really that big of a priority, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's well within our purview as developers to be able to, if we have that data, present that data and say, totally, this is a P1 bug. Mm-hmm. But also, we can see nobody's done it. Nobody's using this area. That might be because it's not been released yet, or that might be because it's maybe been deprecated. But then if it's been deprecated and a bug has been reported, then clearly it's not been deprecated, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was wondering if you have any top tips for someone who inherits a legacy code base. Like, let's say I join a team and there's a code base that we've decided with our descriptions together as a legacy code base. It's not necessarily old, just very hard to change. Mm-hmm. There's perhaps no metrics, no logging. There's all these things in place. What do I do as a new person on that team to handle the stress that everyone seems to have already handled? They're all meditating and saying woosah in the corner to be able to deal with it. How do I join them in that nirvana of not worrying?
Ooh, that's good. So sometimes I don't know that you should join them in that nirvana of not worrying, because I think sometimes we get there's value in somebody with a fresh set of eyes joining a team, because I think like the metaphor of the frog in a pot of boiling water, right? So it's like, the people who are on the team, they got to experience the water temperature increasing slowly over time, and that new person is dropped in fresh and it's like, ouch, this is hot. Like, what are the rest of you doing, right? That can be a valuable perspective to have. And so I think sometimes, speaking up and sharing that and sharing why you think something's frustrated can be useful. I think especially if you're willing to put some energy behind making it better. So I think that can go a long way. I think on some of these aging projects, one of the ways that can show up is with the age of the tooling. I think, there are, I've noticed over the years that there are situations where old tools get accepted as just, this is the tool that was used when the project was built, and so this is the version of the tool we'll continue using. So whether it's like, I don't know, you're having to keep Visual Studio 2012 or whatever, and that's the version that we install, and that's the version that we run, and everybody's working off of Windows 95 VMs and or whatnot, and or Windows 7 VMs or what have you, and they've just they've gotten used to putting up with it, and maybe they've created some automation around that to make it easier to work with. Finding a way to upgrade those things, I think is really beneficial. And I liken that to if I inherited a house that was 100 years old, and I wanted to make some improvements to it, I wouldn't go to the hardware store and ask the person behind the counter where the 100-year-old tools are, right? I would just go buy some tools, and it would be the modern tools, and that's what I would work with. So if I, let's say it was a house that was built in the 1600s, I'm not going to go to the blacksmith and ask them to make me some nails, right? I'm just going to buy a box of nails. And so I think, using modern tools and finding ways to use modern tools, even if it is an aging project, can yield a lot of benefits. And I think that the same is true for modern techniques. And I think, there have been a lot of improvements to kind of ideas around automated testing and different ways to do automated testing. And so a lot of that tooling can be embraced on aging projects as well. So like, if you're, in the Microsoft ecosystem or Microsoft adjacent ecosystem and you're working on a web project, check out Playwright and playwright.net. And, that is a really nice tool for, creating automated web-driven, tests that, interact with your application from the UI, and could, you could probably create a fair bit of test coverage pretty quickly by just, creating one of those that logs into your app and clicks a button, right? And that could be a great smoke test, even if you don't have any tests at all. That can be a great smoke test that can build up some confidence for you to make some more foundational changes in the future.
Okay, so how would I go about learning about these tools then, right? Because like, let's say I'm someone who's earlier in my career, right? You and I feel like we're of a similar vintage. I like to use that word rather than saying, hey, people are old, right? We're vintage, right? We're of a certain vintage, a certain generation, and we have the experience of just like, oh, cool, there's this tool that somebody's told me about, right? Is it just waiting for someone like Scott to come along and tell me, hey, playwright.net exists? Or like, should I be spending time in my downtime looking these things up? Is, the topic before the world went wobbly, we all used to go to meetups.
Right.
Is the topic of going back to meetups or going virtually to meetups and exchanging these bits of information and learning from other people, is that the best way to do it? What would you say? I think
I'm going to give you an it depends answer, because I'm a consultant, and that's what consultants do. But and of course my dog's barking.
He knows you're talking.
Hush. 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 My father-in-law's over and mowing our grass, and she's barking at the...
Okay. He's like, oh no, the house is under attack.
Yes. I think it's important to look at how you like to learn and find resources that match the way you like to learn. So the recommendations that I'm going to have are biased by the way that I like to learn. So I like to learn by reading. I'm not a big fan of watching videos. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts either, even though I host one, which is, it feels like I'm not supposed to say that. So for me, like I read a lot. So I have an RSS feed reader application, and I subscribe to a lot of different RSS feeds. For .NET, like I subscribe to like the master list of all the Microsoft dev blogs. I think those are a great resource. You get to find out what's new in the Microsoft ecosystem in general. InfoQ also usually has really good articles, not just about the .NET ecosystem, but about others. Because sometimes you'll learn about a technique in another ecosystem outside of the one you're currently working with, and you can discover a way to use that tool, even though it's outside your language ecosystem. So like, even though you're building something in .NET, there might still be a way for you to utilize a tool that was written in Java, because it's helping solve a problem in a neat way. And so like, paying attention to what's going on in other communities is what I do. I also, the changelog, there's the changelog podcast. They also have a blog, an RSS feed that you can subscribe to, where like cool projects that they've noticed and they come across get mentioned, and they have an email newsletter that does the same thing. So I learn about neat little projects and neat little tools that way. I also will usually about once a week, I'll open up the GitHub mobile app on my phone and go to the explore section and just look at what's trending and why. Why are these projects trending? are any of them of interest to me and what I've got going on, or any of them kind of useful things for me to file away. I'll also probably, I don't know, once a quarter, I'll go and there are projects on GitHub that are like awesome blank. So there's awesome .NET Core, there's awesome web, there's awesome React, there's even awesome, which is like an awesome list of awesome, of awesome lists. But the idea behind these awesome lists is that it's pretty much just it's a list of links, and some of them are organized by topic, and you can find and learn about interesting things that way. I think you could even go to NuGet and look at some of the analytics for the more popular NuGet packages, and like, what do they do? Why would people use them? Might I be able to make use of them one day, if not now? I think taking the time to kind of do that exploration and kind of just be aware of what's in your ecosystem, can be a really good benefit. And matching a way to receive that data, being able to match that with the way that you like to learn, would be absolutely best. So maybe there's somebody who puts out a video series that you can watch that will let you know that if you like to consume videos, or you may be listening to a podcast. But I think that's how I stay up to, at least I feel like up to date. Although at the same time, I discovered a new way to do something just like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's a pact.io, pact.io, and it's a contract-based testing for HTTP client and server relationships. And if you use their tooling and follow their technique, you don't really need to write an integration test. You can write 2 unit tests, and you've done the same thing, because the 1 unit test defines a contract, and that contract has to be that contract is used in the other unit test to make sure that the server complies with the contract. And it's like, that's brilliant. Like, and this project has been around for like 8 years, and I just now discovered it. So every now and then you'll stumble across something that's new, and it's like, I really like this approach, and when you find those things, figure out a way to use them. And if you have an intuition that something might work, try and experiment, see if it will. And I think that's another thing is being willing to try and be willing to fail. That's a big part of it.
I like it. I like that you mentioned RSS feeds, trending, and analytics, right? Goes all the way back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Because then how else can we find out what other people are using if those metrics weren't there, right? So the metrics are there. We're using them on a daily basis. Twitter is a metrics thing. Yes. That's what it does.
Yes.
It provides you with metrics on the topics that you're interested in. No, I like it. I'm on the back of you discovering something and starting to use it. I'm a big fan of sort of internal hackathons. I mean, I'm a contractor myself, right? So I'm not internal, but like telling people, hey, you should like just grab a random NuGet package or grab a random library or something and see what you can do with it, right? Yeah. And then when you're done, have everyone do a 30-second stand up, and maybe not everyone's as confident and extroverted, but maybe have them do some kind of report that is short, 5 sentences, 30 seconds long. This is what I did. This is how it works. And I wonder if this is useful to us, right?
Yeah.
I just have everyone pick a random library and see what they can build with it. And even if they can't build something with it, that's a positive, right?
That's a learning.
That might mean, exactly. That might mean that the library is no good, or that you need other things to go with it, right? So, yeah, totally agree with you there. Absolutely. So Scott, as we start to sort of wrap up, I was wondering, could you perhaps remind everyone about Legacy Code Rocks and the different projects that you're working on and stuff that's going on, so that people can go, this Scott, he's amazing. Let's go find out all about him.
Yeah, sure. So there's legacycode.rocks is the is where you can find information about the podcast. You can also find instructions for how to join the Slack workspace. It's pretty easy. You just go to slack.legacycode.rocks and sign up from there. And then there's a channel on Slack called Virtual Meetup where you can get the link to join the virtual meetup. And it's at 1 p.m. Wednesdays. And I often joke that it's like a support group for folks who are working with legacy systems. So if you're looking to commiserate with others and learn from them, that's a great place to do that. So those are things we've got going on, and then there's Corgi Bytes. We've got clients that we're currently working with, and then we're also working on a tool that's actually primarily built in .NET. I'll upgrade to .NET 7 as soon as it comes out. We're targeting .NET 6 at the moment. And it's for kind of analyzing dependency freshness as a metric and giving teams insight into just how out of date their third party dependencies are. I have a hypothesis that if that's a metric and a piece of data that if it were more visible to business leaders, that they would put budget behind keeping things updated and keeping things upgraded. So, that's kind of the purpose of that tool that we're working on. We're developing it with an open core model. So the CLI is an open source project that people can check out, and then the all of the nice, easy to consume, easy on the eyes reports are going to be on the closed source website, and it eventually will try to monetize accessing those reports. But for now, it's pretty open. So you can go to freshly.io to try out what we've got so far. You can type in the URL of a GitHub project and see how out of date its dependencies are if we support that language ecosystem. And then you can also head over to github.com/corgibyte/freshly and see a list of all the related projects that we have going on in GitHub. And there's several that are tied together. The architecture is kind of fun. I like geeking out over it. So that's that's something that we've been working on. I think keeping dependencies up to date is important, and I think if it were easier to tell, like very similar to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like if it were easy to tell what features are getting used, it's a similar challenge, but it's more if it were easier to tell just how out of date I am with these libraries that I'm using, then maybe I would keep them up to date.
I like it because we just peeking behind the curtains, doing some insider baseball. That was originally what we were going to talk about, but I think I took us on a completely different direction.
I let you, so I figured
I feel like
it at the
end. I feel like it's a great sort of introduction to the software, right? So perhaps if you're available, and I hate to do this in the recording, right, because it feels like it puts you on the spot, but perhaps we can come back for a part 2.
That'd be great.
And talk about Freshly, right?
Yeah, I'd enjoy that.
Because then it's like, here's the theory as to why you should do it, and here's how you could do it.
Yeah, happy to do a part 2 if you're open to that. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listeners, make sure you tune in for that, for goodness sake. and definitely go check out Legacy Code Rocks, because, like I say, I'm a fan, and it's a really great show. So you should definitely go check that out. I guess all that really remains to say, Scott, is thank you ever so much for spending this time and being a bit presumptuous some more time with us another time to talk about Freshly.
Be happy to do that. Yeah. And thanks for having me, Jamie. It's always nice to be kind of on this side of the interview, if that makes sense. Like as somebody who does an interview style podcast, it's I don't often get to be on this side. So it's nice. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, no worries. Thank you very much. There was my interview with M. Scott Ford, hopefully one of 2. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and if you head over to .netcore.show/review, there are loads of ways to do that. reach out via our contact page. That's at .netcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you all again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.